Hi, everyone. Well, welcome again to our session, South Asian Culture and Cultural Spaces as Protective Factors Against Sexual Violence. Smrithi has started recording, I believe. Yes. So we understand that it's kind of towards the end of the day for some of you, and while we'd love to see everyone's beautiful faces, totally okay if you want to turn your camera off. And before we begin, we just want to reiterate that the SOAR community guidelines extend to this space. Sachika, Smrithi, and I are so excited to share our journey as advocates within our organization, so please feel free to share feedback openly and kindly. We're super open to staying in touch after the session and exchanging contact information to keep some of these conversations going. While most of our content focuses on frameworks that we built, we'll also be discussing some examples of conflict and sexual violence, so we encourage y'all to take breaks as needed and do what you need to do that will help you best stay engaged. So some quick introductions. My name is Alifia Shareef. I use she, they pronouns, and I currently serve on Desi Dance Network's board of directors, where I provide strategic advice and guidance to our current executive leadership team. 6 years ago, I started off on our event planning side of the organization, and then later, along with Sachika, helped build the foundation of our safety and wellness program. I held the role of COO for about 3 years, and I'm excited now to take more of a backseat and see the organization grow under our new leadership. Professionally, I work as a market researcher at a firm in New York City, which I actually just moved to 2 days ago. So if anyone lives in the area and wants to hang out, let me know. I need friends. Sachika?
Hi, everybody. My name is Sachika. I use pronouns she or they. I also am a current member of the DDN Board of Directors, but previously, when I was more involved, I helped co-found DDN's Safety and Wellness Initiative and oversaw them for 4 years, including serving as DDN's Chief People Officer. Now I just volunteer on the survivor support team, but professionally, I work at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, Cincinnati Children's Hospital Child Advocacy Center. Sorry, it's a mouthful. Where I design research and evaluation efforts to mitigate child sexual abuse trauma and promote trauma-informed organizational change.
Hey everyone, my name is Smrithi. I use she, aya pronouns. I serve as a professional advisor to DDN's Safety and Wellness Committee, where I provide training to our dancers and leadership team on sexual violence, healthy relationships, and trauma-informed practices to support the survivors within our circuit. I also assist in handling escalations related to sexual violence, homophobia, and unhealthy relationships. So I work really closely with our alleged harm doers to foster sustainable behavioral change. Professionally, I work for a rape crisis center, and one of my main responsibilities is training therapists and advocates and victim service providers on how to support survivors of sexual violence through their forensic medical exam and forensic interview process.
Today, we'll explore how partnering with arts and cultural spaces can amplify GBV organizations' influence. We'll introduce an evidence-informed framework that our organization developed, which can serve as a resource for other arts and cultural groups looking to collaborate with GBV organizations on comprehensive prevention efforts. And then finally, we'll discuss strategies for generating community buy-in for these initiatives.
Let's start off by thinking about how community partnerships might bolster your prevention efforts as GBV organizations. Throughout this presentation, I'll be referring to 2 different types of organizations, so I just kind of want to level set and explain. When we refer to community-based GBV organizations, we'll say like GBV orgs, but these are organizations like you who offer culturally competent services to our community. And then the other type of organization that we're referring to today is cultural organizations or spaces, places like Desi Dance Network, who provide spaces for South Asians to connect and come together. So it could be like a religious space like temples, mosques, gurdwaras, and churches, or dance academies like a Bhangra Academy or Kathak School, or a singing school. Affinity or ethnic organizations like Marathi Shala or a Gujarati organization, and then also like professional organizations like South Asian doctor associations and so on. We do provide like the disclaimer or note, we do recognize that these cultural organizations don't inherently have anything to do with preventing sexual violence, and we recognize that they're often inherently spaces that do condone or perpetuate harm by enabling harm doers. Gender-based violence organizations are vital in restoring safety and supporting survivors. They provide, as you know, culturally competent services like safety planning and legal resources by expert paid advocates. And they must be leaders in any prevention efforts. But there is one weakness that gender-based violence organizations can counter through partnership with cultural organizations. And that is that gender-based violence organizations are kind of inherently socially marginalized. Hear me out. Here's an example. At the Child Advocacy Center where I work, we provide critical services like trauma-informed forensic interviews, mental health referrals, medical care, and legal resources. But our impact on the survivors' healing is limited by the broader social systems that survivors must return to after they see us. So institutions like schools, workplaces, gyms, your dance studio, and so on, too often these places will enable those who cause harm, often at the expense of the survivor. And as a Child Advocacy Center, we recognized that we couldn't protect survivors from the stigma and vitriol and exclusion that the communities that they once belonged to might extend to them after they come forward. And we recognize that it's really not fair that often survivors are forced to choose between getting justice and having access to protective factors and cultural spaces. As a Child Advocacy Center, we couldn't fix this single-handedly, but we began engaging in community partnerships and prevention work because we wanted our survivors to be able to access long-term healing. And so that's where systems change comes in. Cultural community organizations can be powerful sources of protective factors like cultural identity, belonging, and social support. And they can promote resilience and healing if they change their culture. So this is where partnership between cultural organizations and GBV orgs are crucial, because with expertise from GBV orgs, cultural organizations can become safe spaces that, instead of enabling harm, validate and protect survivors so that survivors can maintain social connections that are essential for healing. So our core idea today that we'll be talking through is that these partnerships can expand access to gender-based violence organizations' resources while fostering safer communities and breaking cycles of harm. And in this presentation, we'll share how GDN partnered with different advocates and experts in the field to implement a cultural shift in our community that is very much still ongoing, very much still work in progress. But we hope our suggested process and personal examples will help you visualize what successful partnership for prevention can look like in practice.
So just a little bit of background on our cultural organization, Desi Dance Network. We're a nonprofit that was founded about a decade ago to support the South Asian collegiate dance circuit. What began as just a fun college extracurricular activity for people to just be able to dance and kind of do what they did growing up, quickly evolved into a nationwide network of competitive dance teams that would travel to different competitions. And as this community grew, so did the demand for structure, resources, and governance, leading to our creation. Today, we have about 100 volunteers that oversee the dance season for over 100 Bollywood fusion teams. They partner with 25 plus competitions, and they reach about 2,000 collegiate dancers each year. And that's not even including our many alumni that stay engaged in the community after graduation. Our mission is to celebrate South Asian arts and cultures, because we are not a monolith, provide a platform for artists and professionals, and increase South Asian representation in mainstream arts and media. So you might be wondering why a cultural arts organization like DDN started thinking about sexual violence. A few years ago, we were a brand new, entirely volunteer-led organization, and unfortunately, we're still completely volunteer-led, but we have a few more resources now. We used to just rely on Google searches and a bit of luck to keep things running, especially when it came to things like filing our taxes. We were just doing our best. Beyond event planning, we had very little formal expertise outside of that. However, as former leaders of our collegiate teams and competitions, we had a lot of deep connections within our community. Between 2016 and 2018, we began to see people coming forward describing experiences that suggested a lack of inclusivity and psychological safety within our circuit. For example, we would have queer dancers sharing experiences of homophobia. We would have racially diverse teams speak out on microaggressions that they faced at competitions. We had majority or all women's teams report discriminatory comments from judges. And all of these stories sparked a community-driven push for change. Groups issued calls to actions. They started to introduce basic safety measures at after parties like sober monitors and angel shots. And as our community and our organization grew with better technology and more established leadership, we were able to centralize these resources and provide more structure to these efforts, which we'll highlight throughout our presentation.
So we created a roadmap to partnership to try and give you a sense of the steps that you can take to successfully engage in partnership with cultural organizations. And a good first step at times is to have the partnering cultural organization make a public commitment. South Asian communities have high context cultures where reputation and social influence impact how messages are received. So when a cultural organization commits verbally to the work, it holds weight and it stakes them to the work. Of course, words need to be followed by action, but there is value in just inherently staking yourself to the work. And when the message comes from the cultural organization, it platforms the issue, which brings it into the mainstream. So when DDN competitions named the issue, it really broke a lot of the silence around harm in the South Asian collegiate dance community, and then later sparked conversation and action. The second step to leveraging these cultural organizations effectively can be generating buy-in within that partnering cultural organization. We recommend starting with leadership because engaging those with most influence can ensure a stronger commitment long-term.
So one way that we started to engage our leadership was using the rape culture pyramid as an exercise to help identify circuit policies and practices that were contributing to harm. This proved to be a really powerful tool because it helped our leaders recognize how seemingly small behaviors like rape jokes or hypersexuality, which are not actually small behaviors at all, normalize sexual violence within our space. By making these connections clear, the exercise fostered a sense of collective responsibility, helping our leaders understand how their individual actions could compound and play a role in creating a safer and more inclusive environment. This shift in perspective was key to generating buy-in.
Also, before we keep going, I just want to acknowledge that I have a cold, so I apologize for the sniffing and if I'm ever unclear. I'm doing my best. A systemic lens can help gender-based violence organizations design targeted, relevant approaches in fixed environments like cultural organizations. So the rape culture pyramid showed us how behaviors normalized harm, but the CDC social ecological model, which is this model that's shown on the screen, helps us analyze risks and protective factors across the different levels of our environment. So we asked ourselves what social forces were creating risk at each level and how could we amplify protective factors to mitigate those risks. A lack of relevance in approach can lead to off-target interventions. So an example is the common misconception of sexual violence as the result of just a few bad apples. Many people see sexual violence as something that's caused by a few bad actors, so they think that punishment and incarceration will solve the issue, which has been a big theme throughout this weekend's presentations, is understanding that that is kind of a fallacy. And so child abuse and lack of social supports are actually stronger drivers of harmful behavior, which highlights the need for restorative responses, not exclusively punitive or isolating responses. And then in our circuit especially, the stranger danger misconception really misled people to think that assaults were being committed at after parties by random outsiders, not members of the community. And as a result, prevention efforts focused on things like angel shots or drink covers to prevent drugging, or just educating people on signs of drugging and how to respond when that happens. And while these are evidence-informed interventions for assault in public spaces by strangers, our deeper analysis revealed that there were different, more influential risk factors that we could address and have more success in centering and addressing. So as GBV professionals, you're likely aware of the many social factors that create risk, and they're listed on the screen as well, but I'll name some of the ones that were most pertinent to our community of South Asian collegiate dancers. So the first thing was that people coming forward with their experiences were of all gender identities and sexualities, which indicated a need to expand our efforts beyond the gender binary. Otherwise, we risked excluding identities and experiences. Also, while men can be survivors, we did still observe the pattern where cis men were most likely to be repeat perpetrators in our community. And in South Asian culture, we know that oftentimes boys are raised and encouraged to have a sense of entitlement to power, resources, and other people's bodies, as well as to have a lack of accountability. And they are often protected by tight-knit networks. And there was no exception here in DDN. We often saw that harm doers were able to stay in positions of power like captainship without accountability, while survivors were silenced or forced out of teams entirely. And the entitlement that cis men in our community have often also means that when we name that harm is caused, they want to just be like cavalierly say sorry and ask us to take their word that they're not going to do it again and let's just move on from it. We obviously know that repairing harm is a much more involved process than that. And I just share these points because I think sometimes some people assume that younger generations are like different or better or more aware. But really these issues do persist intergenerationally, which is another reason why this systemic approach to break the cycle can be very effective. Some other factors are that our circuit's filled with young adults aged 18 to 22 or 24 who are being exposed to their first time having sexual activity or engaging in a serious romantic relationship, engaging in online dating or college culture like hookup culture or binge drinking culture. So again, that helped identify that education around healthy ways to engage in these activities would be valuable and potentially more valuable than interventions like drink covers. And then finally, the pressures of academics and hyper-competitiveness in our circuit result in really demanding schedules that contribute to anxiety, depression, and isolation. And so, unfortunately, we're no exception again to this pattern where stigma can prevent people from seeking help for sexual violence, as well as for mental health challenges. So all of this to say, by conducting thorough systems assessments, GBV orgs can help their partner organizations identify the most influential risk factors in their cultural spaces, and then therefore target resources to promoting the most relevant protective factors.
Any questions before we move through? Awesome.
So similar to what Sachika said before about trying to get cultural organizations to create a public commitment, after our own reflective conversations, we created a statement of anti-oppression that was adapted from the Anti-Oppression Network. And we did this to solidify our commitment to this work. So in doing so, we adopted a few key frames. We made it a point to acknowledge what is and isn't in our control. While it would be really nice, we understood that we couldn't dismantle patriarchy overnight. But what we could do was provide training and create safer spaces for our dancers. This helps set realistic expectations for our initiative while still driving meaningful change. Another priority was making clear that this wasn't some abstract woo-woo initiative, and we tried to tie it very directly to our organizational values of excellence, empathy, growth, creativity, and community. People often ask us why we dedicated so much time and resources towards this work, and we answer that when harm goes unaddressed, it disrupts how we connect and collaborate and create as artists, and that it impacts our ability to thrive as an arts organization. And then finally, like we mentioned before, we wanted to emphasize collective responsibility. Transformation requires unlearning and growth, and everyone has a role to play. Everyone has a stake in the game. A healthier environment benefits everyone, and fostering that culture is a shared responsibility. Our next step was to align on definitions. As an organization serving a collegiate community, we had a constantly changing membership of students entering college at the age of 17, 18, and then graduating and leaving college around the age of 22, 23, and then even our graduate school students. So because of this, we needed clear and consistent definitions to be able to align quickly on action internally as an organization, but also externally when we were kind of providing guidance to all of the groups within our community. We also recognized that differences in social, legal, and medical definitions of assault were at best confusing and at worst invalidating to survivors. So we used a conflict theory perspective to formalize our own definition that was clear, encompassed a wide range of experiences in what we hoped was a validating way, and acknowledged the societal structures that enabled harm.
Now that we've talked about generating buy-in, the next step is getting the scaffolding that you need for success. You'll definitely need dedicated time and resources from both organizations, and an MOU can help solidify this. Some examples of how DDN dedicated resources as a cultural organization are: we found field experts like social workers and lawyers to commit to volunteering to advise on our work. We established a committee to organize programming around prevention and education. We set up relationships with survivor support and gender-based violence organizations like Callisto to ensure that there were concrete resources that we could refer our survivors to. And finally, we collected nominal, like usually $50 to $100 annual fees from teams and competitions to pay for these concrete resources like time from our field experts and then Callisto as well.
So to kind of help scaffold that partnership, something that could be really helpful is aligning with your partners on what success looks like. For example, we knew within DDN Safety and Wellness, we knew that for several years, sexual violence would continue to take place. So rather than trying to measure success by the number of decreases in sexual violence to to indicate success. We define success as the increased presence and influence of key protective factors, some of which are listed on the screen. Things that we wanted to amplify were the sense of an inclusive, nurturing, and safe environment that was created by befriending other South Asian college students. We wanted to equip leaders with the skills to validate survivors and refer them to GBV resources. We wanted to encourage the engagement in pro-social behaviors that were facilitated through dance, things like goal setting or teamwork, or setting up really strong communication and feedback loops and building healthy relationships with others. And then, of course, access to dance, which is an amazing art form that can help people reclaim their body after sexual assault.
When you're looking to scaffold this partnership between both organizations, it's also critical to remember that partnership is relational. So it can be helpful to have clear roles for clarity and define those roles by considering each organization's strengths. So for example, DDN Safety and Wellness would never conduct investigations or assign and declare guilt or blame because we don't have the expertise to do that. But we do know that our dancers go to each other first when they need support. And so our role instead can be to equip our dancers to have some basic skills to respond to survivors in a supportive and trauma-informed way and direct them to qualified credible resources like GPV orgs, and then increase the referrals and utilization of those organizations. Another important step is to dedicate time to reflect so that you're learning by doing or while doing. And then finally, when it comes to relationships, really making sure that you're building those relationships between the people who are leading the work forward in both organizations intentionally. So that means normalizing feedback between one another. Conflict is going to be inevitable because it's a culture shift. And how you address that conflict as partners will set the tone for your partnership and will be predictive of the partnership's longevity. We personally, internally, had so many tough and vulnerable conversations as DDN C-suite, but we were fortunate to maintain our friendships. And this definitely didn't happen by chance. I think it required a lot of intentionality and cultivating positive relationships and normalizing feedback between one another. We also always recognize that this work is personal. And so burnout is a real risk. And so we took breaks as needed. Definitely could have done a better job with that as well. And we also relied on the strong friendships between the people who were doing this work to refuel ourselves. Finally, your partners should be ready to be transparent about their capacity and acknowledge when they're falling short as a partner. South Asian culture is very implicit, so organizations will be, sometimes they think that it might make more sense to ghost someone or implicitly show that they don't have as much time to engage or interest or capacity or whatever, but instead partner organizations should clearly flag when they're overextending themselves so that there can be a discussion about how to effectively scale back.
So step 4 of developing partnership is by using a systems change approach to facilitate that cultural change. Partnering with a cultural organization offers the advantage of creating and testing cultural change in a fixed social space. So the cultural organization spaces influence community values and an individual's perception of what healthy relationships and spaces can look like. So to create that lasting and powerful change in both the overall environment as well as the individual perspective, a systems change approach is going to be key. So we encourage you to take on approaches like plan, do, study, and act. And this is going to help partners reflect and iterate rapidly. So that's again where normalizing that feedback from the get-go and dedicating time for group reflection is going to be super helpful. A systems change also includes walking the walk, and that's to build trust. So we started internally and began training and prevention efforts within our DDN and Legend board for a year before we required our competitions and our teams to do so. So this approach really allowed us to lead by example, where we demonstrated our commitment and encouraged partnering competitions and teams to actively engage in our initiative. And starting with low effort and high reward initiatives can also help build momentum. So for example, our first action was partnering with Callisto, as Sachika talked about before. Callisto is a survivor-centered tool that helps connect survivors harmed by the same perpetrator. So it allows them to coordinate that action, so there's an increased likelihood of them achieving justice. Because we invested in this resource, we literally put our money where our mouth was and showed our commitment to supporting survivors. So this initial step not only provided immediate support to our survivors, but also created momentum by demonstrating tangible action, inspiring further initiatives, and encouraging broader participation in our efforts. So, in order to build momentum for sustainable change, partners must recognize the consequences of not following through. So, if you can't keep to your commitments, why would anyone trust you to take action? So, we've always been intentional about making verbal commitments only when we were certain that we could deliver. And in any case where we fell short, we obviously took responsibility with transparency and full accountability. So, when trying to execute a prevention strategy, organizations sometimes make the mistake on focusing on a single area, like education or community building, while neglecting others, such as accountability. And so, this leaves gaps that still allows harm to perpetuate. So, at DDN, we created a comprehensive framework to really guide our work, and we operate our work through a four-pronged approach. One is education. So we utilize trainings and discussions to enhance dialogue and encourage skill building. The second is community. So we provide access to dance, which is an art form that promotes pro-social behaviors. Third is prevention. So we create actionable plans to mitigate risks of sexual and intimate partner violence. And then fourth is accountability. So we take active measures to address and repair harm while also promoting growth and behavioral change within the harm doer. So this framework, by all means, is not stagnant. We're constantly refining it, relooking at it, seeing what's working and what's not. And by refining this framework, we can really create a dynamic, effective system that pushes back against the social forces that not only normalize, but also perpetuate harm in South Asian contexts.
In order for prevention and protection to be dynamic and comprehensive, like Smrithi mentioned, we decided to make sure that every aspect of the framework was impacting every stakeholder in our organization. So annually, what we do is we take a few months to assess challenges and strengths and matrix the framework across every role group. So our board, the different judges, the different competition boards we partner with, our team members, or dancers, to ensure that we are tailoring programming to promote each aspect of the framework in a way that's relevant to each role group's needs. But we also recognize that resources are limited and restrictive when it comes to grant funding and other factors. And so that can prevent both GBV organizations and partnering cultural organizations, especially ones like us who are completely volunteer run, from executing a fully comprehensive approach. But what's helpful with this framework then is that with this structure, you can at least still scale back your initiative strategically without compromising impact by assessing for balance across all aspects of the framework and all stakeholders.
So when it came to education with our community, we started by creating a code of ethics where we named our standards and expectations for behaviors. So we discussed earlier how entitlement is an influential risk factor. So people would often say things like they didn't know a behavior that was very obviously misconduct. Was misconduct. So by writing and embedding our code in all of our documents, we could try to set the expectations clear from the get-go. And this expectation is upheld across all dimensions, from our dancers to judges and competition boards. We also developed and assigned training around topics like conflict resolution, survivor advocacy basics, bystander intervention, and healthy relationships to really saturate our circuit with not only the awareness, but also the skills to be able to engage in healthy behaviors. And most importantly, all of our content and material is reviewed thoroughly by subject matter experts. So we do have a few folks who are, few of our trainers who are college students, right, who are maybe majoring in things that are unrelated to sexual violence and intimate partner violence. So really making sure that we're taking on the guidance and advice of our subject matters to ensure that our material is concrete. We also tried to make our training focus on building feasible skills and really leaving participants with better practices to implement in their day-to-day. So for example, we discussed earlier that we know DDN's purpose is not to provide that direct survivor support services, but really to just strengthen a dancer's capacity to be able to refer their peers to credible supports like gender-based violence organization. We also know that how people respond is predictive of a survivor's healing experience and whether or not they will be able to access certain resources. So therefore, we provide training to our dancers on how to validate someone who's come forward by using SAMHSA's 4 Rs of trauma-informed response. So this includes realize, recognize, respond, and resist traumatization. So the realize component also emphasizes that being an ally can be emotionally challenging and may lead to things like secondary traumatic stress. So we also discuss strategies for monitoring personal well-being, how to practice self-care, as well as how to set healthy boundaries in personal and professional relationships. Additionally, we cover best practices on how to guide survivors towards credible support systems, such as campus survivor services or local gender-based violence organizations. Um, I think Alifia mentioned this earlier, but we have so many different college teams that we work with all throughout the nation. So it's really important for us to identify local gender-based violence organizations that are specific to the city that our dancers are living in. We also assign folks to attend bystander intervention training through Right to Be, which is an organization that discusses safe intervention practices. So through relatable and relevant case scenarios, dancers can practice implementing the 5 Ds of bystander intervention and identify which ones would be the safest to use in a specific crisis. So, of course, we facilitate all of our trainings and conversations using trauma-informed techniques. So this includes providing access to our slides in advance. We give advanced notice of sensitive information, so providing a content warning at the beginning of our training, and also alternatives for those who don't have the emotional capacity to participate at the time. We also found that when it came to our training, it was the most effective when we scaffolded it with the following frames. So I'm going to go through each one of them. Frame one is that we always start our conversations by talking about the difference between being uncomfortable versus being safe. So I think that has been a common theme in the summit this weekend. So people often misconstrued discomfort as an indicator that they were feeling unsafe. So we would make statements like, these conversations and trainings can be uncomfortable and stressful, which can sometimes make us feel unsafe. And so there are steps that we are taking to make this a safe space, including XYZ. We also took time to identify what feelings of discomfort can look like and really how to work through them. So we may say something like, when you feel stressed, you may feel XYZ. You can engage in practices like reminding yourself that you're safe, grounding techniques such as the 5-4-3-2-1 method, or deep breathing to really help regulate your nervous system. And if we noticed that anyone was feeling heightened or took some time to log off, we might also offer to check in with them after the training. Frame two, when it came to scaffolding our training, was to make sure that we are inclusive of all identities and experiences. So our trainings on healthy relationships are inclusive and intentionally highlight queer relationships, ensuring that they're, not solely focused on heterosexual ones. Any discussions that we have around reproductive or sexual health is inclusive of people of all genders, not just cis folks. We explicitly state that harm can be caused by anyone of any gender, not just cis men, although the majority of the harm doers that we see here at DDN are cis men. We explain that many of our dancers have experienced previous victimizations, like child sexual abuse or teen dating violence. So when we engage in dialogue, it's really important to approach it with sensitivity. And then we also remind people to be gentle, but also constructive with their feedback, as we're all at different points in our learning journeys. Frame three to scaffold our training is using intentional and specific language. So people in our circuit specifically were sensitive to saying words like sexual assault and wanted us to say SA instead. So we refused to do this and explained that we wanted to use formal terms like sexual assault to further avoid stigmatizing these experiences. We also use survivor instead of victim, as the latter was seen as disempowering, but we did remind folks that the term victim will likely be used by law enforcement and the justice system. We also encourage people to use terms like harm doer rather than perpetrator or abuser. This was because people were often labeling harm doers as perpetrators or abusers when their actions didn't constitute abuse or perpetration. So when we introduced the term harm doer, it really required people to pair that term with a more specific naming of the harm that was actually done, and prevented them from generalization or really defining that person's identity. So by using the term harm doer, we also create spaces for individuals to really take responsibility for their actions without feeling permanently stigmatized. And the term harm doer also emphasizes the possibility of transformation and reintegration. So this really invites people to engage in self-reflection, learning, and the accountability process, whether that's with DDN or on a personal level. Frame 4 is that we made sure that all of our trainers and facilitators within DDN, who are usually college students and not subject matter experts, had basic practice and education on best practices for facilitation. So they work closely with people like me and Sachika to ensure that their training is up to par with our expectations. So our trainers know how to name and address harmful comments in ways that promote learning and also take time to restore the safety if a harmful comment is being made. Frame 5 is that we use case scenarios that are based on events that have happened before in our circuit. And this is to really allow people to visualize how concepts can apply to their dance experiences and practice skills when it comes to bystander intervention at an after party if they witness someone making homophobic comments or gestures, for example. And then finally, frame 6 is always conclude by promoting hope. So when the messaging is fatalistic or urgent, it can actually disillusion people and kind of reduce their engagement in the change that we want them to create. So we use frames like we can make a difference, or it's so powerful to see how many people are here in the room today engaging in this conversation. It shows that you really care about the work that you're doing. And so when we use frames like that, it could really be motivating and allow people to contribute to sustained action.
Prevention is our next section of the framework, and prevention in the GBV field is referred to as a broader concept of kind of like all of the work that encompasses our framework. But in the context of this framework, it's referring to specific steps that are taken to reduce risk. So we created safety and wellness plans and helped walk every single team in competition through creating their own plan that was specific to their environment and team needs. So they would institute practices like creating an easily accessible list of crisis support resources for mental health and sexual assault crises, ensuring team members are never alone at after parties, so having things like a check-in buddy system. Instituting no questions asked absences, so allowing excused absences to encourage breaks in personal time and allow for some confidentiality and privacy when things come up. Also promoting sleep and healthy eating during pre-competition week. That one is definitely very much still a work in practice, but trying to move away from things like 4 a.m. dance practice during an exam week, during a comp week. And then finally, other measures like offering designated safe spaces throughout the competition weekend at every step of the weekend so that there's someone available and a space available for support and decompression if you need it. Accountability was probably the area that we focused on the most internally. And when we considered accountability in DDN, we felt like we could promote healthier relationships by building skills for addressing conflict and harm before they spiral to create further risk or cause further harm. So one big policy implementation change that we really encouraged was having feedback loops to enable anonymous community assessment of conduct. And so all of our teams then also instituted formal processes for reviewing and responding to any feedback that was shared. So just a brief example is, for example, a dancer might report an inappropriate behavior by a liaison in an after party. Say it was this person who keeps walking up behind people and dancing on them without asking for consent, just like not really recognizing physical space boundaries. And then also just for clarity, a liaison is like this is a personal like ambassador or representative of a competition that like works really closely with a team throughout the whole competition weekend and just make sure like they know where to go, that they feel supported and included and so on. So it's pretty important that that person sets the tone and is, I mean, just as important as anyone else, that they're respectful of people's personal boundaries and space. But what a competition might do in response is get more context by talking to the team and potentially the specific individual if they're interested or willing. They would thank the team for the feedback and be transparent about how they plan to respond to the concerns shared. And for the sake of time, I'm going to focus on how they might respond in response to the alleged like harm doer, not necessarily how they would respond to the survivor, because I think that might be a little bit more straightforward for folks. So focusing on how they would respond in the context of their liaison's behavior. After receiving this feedback, the comp might consider having a conversation with that liaison directly if it's deemed safe. And in a case like this, with the example I gave where they're like dancing on people, kind of, there isn't necessarily a concern of a specific person being outed as the reporter, because usually that behavior is reported from multiple sources, which we've seen. Usually it's multiple people who raise that alarm bell. And also that's kind of like a lower risk behavior where we might not necessarily be concerned for like retaliation in that moment. And so when speaking to the liaison, the competition would explain why that behavior is concerning and suggest appropriate alternatives. So like next time you want to dance with someone, instead of just walking up behind them, why don't you ask them if they want to dance? And then also probably more discussion around like body language and how, you know, people might not be comfortable saying no if you ask them and so on. So what can you look for in terms of cues? But anyways, they would monitor future conduct, since in this case example, it's after the event is over. There might not be that many like growth promoting measures of relevance to institute, but at least the report could still help the organizational environment long term, because the competition could think about ways that next year, how can they better clarify expectations for conduct in the future when they're managing a group of liaisons or training them in the year before the competition. They might also reconsider their relationship with the liaison depending on that person's response to the feedback. If the liaison isn't open to the feedback, it could be an indicator that maybe they should part ways with that person. If the liaison is remorseful, they could look out for demonstrated behavior change. So like maybe the comp board season is officially over, but obviously we all still hang out with each other. We all still go out together. So how is that person behaving in those environments? And are they being respectful and demonstrating change? Recurring behavior will probably lead to the competition choosing not to work with that person again. And it would also help them identify that they probably shouldn't put that person in additional higher levels of like leadership or responsibility, because usually becoming a liaison is like a way that you can develop expertise and then progress in that organization's leadership. So if the comp felt like they had ample advance notice and training around proper conduct, they would probably consider not putting that person in additional levels of leadership, because it would suggest that that person and the organization actually would suggest that the organization might not have the capacity or resources to support that person for success. And they probably wait to see growth or improvement from the individual before promoting that person, or even before continuing to work with them, like I said earlier. The competition could also ask other members of the team about that individual's behavior, or about behaviors like that in general, to see if other people experience that. How are they feeling? What can be done to restore their sense of safety? What can be done to restore or to prevent this behavior if it is occurring at a larger level and that individual person isn't like an isolated example? So this process recognizes that members might not be walking into our environment with the best upbringing or the clearest information or directives on appropriate and respectful behavior. But rather than immediately punishing and ostracizing someone, this reflective process makes an attempt to better set expectations for conduct and prevent similar incidents from recurring, as well as put the onus on competitions to create a safe environment and to be reflective when something comes up. Another thing that came to us with accountability was connecting survivors to credible supports and resources. So after sexual violence, community members validate survivors and refer them to GBV orgs in the region so that they can get access to supports like safety planning. And then we can encourage that person to share their safety plan with the team. So here's another example. Say a captain breaks up with their partner, who's also a dancer on that team, and say that ex-partner is eventually also removed from the team for being a really like negative influence and being rude to others and so on. And then around that same time, this ex-partner also starts stalking and harassing the captain. So the captain could do safety planning with a credible survivor advocate, but then they could bring that safety plan back to their team. And our cultural space could be amplified as a protective factor because maybe that safety plan includes a measure like someone from the team is always walking home the captain from practice when it's dark. Or maybe it means that another exec member speaks to the security officer in the building to where they hold practice to warn them and prepare that person to intervene if the harm doer does appear. In this sense, the team plays a role in reducing the burden on the survivor, the captain, to keep themselves safe. Just a verbal check, sorry, how are we doing on time? Rajaman?
We have until the hour, so we have 10
Okay.
minutes.
Perfect. Another piece when it comes to accountability is promoting community growth and healing after harm. So we analyze harm at a community and an individual level. So after an incident, we'll reflect on how the team or organizational environment might have contributed to the misconduct or harm occurring. So going back to this previous example of the captain who was being harassed and stalked by their ex, let's say that this ex actually had a history of mean behavior. So it didn't just kind of like start after the breakup. They were always really rude to everyone and kind of created like an unsafe, toxic space. But because they were dating the captain, it was always brushed under the rug. Well, this reflection could then inform the team that maybe it'd be helpful to engage in a preventative measure in the future, like quarterly team evals, where members give anonymous feedback and then captains review that feedback and talk to team members about it. That way they can provide guidance and curb issues early before they spiral. So to reduce bias, they could also ensure that they're not handling or reviewing the feedback of someone that they're in a close personal relationship with so that people feel more comfortable raising an alarm or just raising awareness if something's going on that they're not okay with. And so then as a result of this incident, the team now has a relevant preventative measure in place to try to address and curb such concerns in the future.
So we also leverage our ability to control membership when it comes to accountability. So we try to promote growth without removing people because that can promote a sense of cancel culture. However, we will remove people in certain circumstances. So if the harm doer is refusing to engage with us or won't acknowledge the role in the harm that they've done. Or another reason we may remove someone is if they express and hinge on values that are explicitly against our values or that would harm the safety of our dancers. So for example, if a competition refuses to engage in safety measures at their after party because they want to use their funds to create, really awesome sweatshirts for their dancers, that would be something that we would not negotiate with. We also believe that unlearning or growing can really require time and resources. So sometimes a person is willing to grow, but we believe that it still requires a break from the circuit. So this break is temporary, but we might require them to take one because we feel that at their baseline, they can't safely or ethically engage with us without demonstrating that behavioral change. So we really don't force ourselves to work with everyone. We only work with people who are willing to engage in the work that we're doing and take accountability for the harm that they've done. With that being said, because growth and reparation are important, we really also value the time and mental wellness of our volunteers. So if someone is repeatedly and increasingly harmful after our support and the warnings that we provided them, it's okay if our volunteers want to take a break from working with that person. So when it comes to re-entering the circuit, when a harm doer has basically engaged in their growth plan, they must have demonstrated growth by pointing to specific ways that they've engaged in training and learning, how they have repaired harm with those that they've hurt, and also how they've begun rebuilding the trust by establishing relationships with other dancers in the community. So we also ask to see a future plan for engaging in service to the community going forward so that they are continuing to fix the harm that they've caused. And we mentioned before that it's really common for others to excuse a harm doer's behavior. So to counter this, leaders in our circuit will sign on as accountability partners for those re-entering members. So they forfeit their membership if that individual were to reoffend. So this really ensures that the support is genuine and that people aren't just vouching for someone because, they're their friend. At the heart of our community is a commitment to connection and creativity. So instead of fostering hyper competitiveness, we try to cultivate an environment where artistic expression thrives. So our safety and wellness advocates work directly with our teams and our competitions by offering personalized support and guidance to really help them grow. However, when it comes to the community aspect of it, an influential risk factor is something that we've encountered is community backlash. So one of the biggest challenges that we've had is making sure that the community is on board. So when it comes to addressing harm and setting accountability measures and creating safe spaces for everyone, this really requires that collective effort, but people don't always welcome change right away. So when it comes to the work that we're doing and what you all are going to do, it's important to expect community backlash and understand that it's often a symptom of trauma, fear, and ultimately like resistance to change. So backlash can take many forms. Some of the things that we've heard before are, nothing you do is good enough, or what y'all are doing is a little too late, or we just want to dance, right? As if these conversations don't belong in our community. So we've, discussed a few key frames that can really help generate that community buy-in and counter backlash, but I do want to end with a couple more that I hope y'all can implement into your work. So number one is normalizing mistakes and recognizing that no approach will be perfect. And there will be missteps and we will learn from them, but the alternative of doing nothing is not an option. So really emphasizing that, if we can't eliminate oppressive structures overnight, we can address how these issues show up in our spaces and how we respond to them. Next is to really build relationships and validate frustrations that people have. So as I mentioned, people are resistant to change and maybe are fearful of change and how that may impact the way that they are in with this organization. So instead of dismissing those concerns that they may have, we really want to acknowledge them by while at the same time reinforcing the importance of the work that we're doing. So whenever we get negative feedback, we always set up meetings with those folks to talk it out and see what they have to say and really, engage in a collaborative discussion. And then lastly is repetition. So people don't always internalize the message the first time that they hear it. So we try our best to continue to repeat, and reinforce our goals and approach, hoping that it will eventually stick.
Great. And then I know we've reached our time, so just a couple of notes to wrap up. First of all, we compiled slides where we listed the key frames together. We didn't present that today, but it's in like the version of the slides that you can access. And then I also just wanted to thank the people who pushed this work forward. We talked a little bit about backlash and risk and sacrifice. We didn't go into that in depth, and I just want to like really extend my deepest gratitude to all the people who put their like social reputation on the line and did these things that weren't necessarily popular but were right, and created some very important change. But like I said and said in the chat and said, we'll say again and again and again, this is such a long process of change and we very much are not where we want to be, but we're just really proud and grateful for the people who put in the work to make this happen. We also mentioned that a lot of us are stepping back in our roles in DDN. And so if you want to collaborate with the safety wellness folks, they would really appreciate your support. It's just not us anymore, but we're so happy to pass it on. And so the contact information for those people is listed on the screen. If you're ever supporting a survivor who's related to our network, and there's a way that we can support their safety planning, you can email our confidential email, which will notify me and Smrithi, and then we can work together and provide support. But yeah, that's just how to stay in touch. We know that this was a quick and tight conversation, so we're super open and interested in further conversation. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Sachika, Smrithi, and Alifia, for leading such an important conversation. This session, as you probably have learned from all the chat engagement, like resonated deeply with a lot of people. So thank you so much for all the work that you've put in, and thank you for the invitation for folks to also engage. I'm going to quickly launch a poll so that y'all can let us know how this session was for you. And I will drop a link in the chat where you can find this session's resource goodie bag and notes.
And thank you all for your kind words and encouragement of the work that we're doing. It's really nice to get that feedback.